All right, good day, folks. Thanks for coming to Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Browngan, your host here at Madison 365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts, and having a good time. Anyways, hope you're all enjoying your fall and had a good and safe Halloween weekend with everything that's been going down. So we're going to be running through a bit of, news or interesting things that particularly intersect with Madison over the last couple of weeks that have happened. So let's dive into it. First one is dads on duty and fights within MMSD. So a couple of different things are going on here in Madison with the Metropolitan Madison School District. Like a lot of school districts, there's issues of fights going on. It's important for us to pull out a little bit when we're thinking about these fights and things youth are going through. One where everybody, right, particularly, anywhere and in this country, we're all on edge. We're all on edge. To act like our youth that have less impulse control than adults who are all on edge aren't going to be acting out in a society that is fraying, where the majority of people in this country can't afford a $400 life crisis, where, the majority of people are effectively broke. Even our so-called middle class are effectively broke. And we're expecting our children not to act out when we know youth act out in response to trauma. And the thing is, this entire country is profoundly traumatized historically, intergenerationally, and ongoing right now. We as a society and even as a localized community have not even begun to reconcile with the fact that at least around 800,000 people have died, at least, and the actual estimate is probably over 1 million have died in this country over the last year and a half because of COVID. That is an aspect of mass death, and we are not processing this at a social or cultural level anywhere. Individuals might be, but as a community, we are not processing this death and this trauma that has been going on top of the fact of particularly kids growing up in an educational environment where threats of in-school gun violence is very real, and mass shootings, regardless of socioeconomic status, where they see their parents having increasing difficulty providing for them and providing stability, where we have institutions, our government institutions, increasingly are unable or unwilling to provide for our society to meet the social contract. So that's like that one thing that we need to understand before we jump to this, what the youth are out of control. We as a society are out of control. Our institutions aren't serving us. We have much of our country is effectively rebelling against another half because they can't accept the idea of a multicultural democracy. We're fraying, and people are like, the youth are out of control. So that's like one thing. But the other thing is they're also youth. And it seems some of our MMSD parents, predominantly white ones, are wanting to call in the police. We'll get to that. So, dads on duty. So in Shreveport, Louisiana, there were 23 students that were arrested or incarcerated after a fight, like a one-day fight. Parents met. This was a crisis, and there were ongoing fights like MMSD. There were fights going on. Parents met afterwards trying to figure out what to do. A group of fathers volunteered and decided to create this thing called Dads on Duty, where they effectively patrolled the school. Now, these dads didn't have officers with them. They didn't have the threat of violence backing them up. They didn't have the threat of arresting people. They were just there to make positive connections and to enforce a safe learning environment within the school. And maybe enforce is the wrong word. reinforce, perhaps. Again, because there wasn't the threat of aggression. And how do they do this? Is they made jokes, they had fun, they're building relationships. They're being the uncle opposed to the authoritative father figure that is going to be there with a whip if you act out. They're there in the AM, they're there at lunch, and they're there after school. And they engage with the students in real ways. There's about 15 or 30 or so of them, and they patrol. And there has not been a fight since then. Now, to wrap this back around to MMSD and some real realities within Wisconsin school districts. One is that the state has spent more on incarceration than education since the Doyle administration. We have defunded education. Now, folks want to freak out about defunding police and chaos and blah, 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 blah. We have defunded education. Our schools don't have enough support staff for our students. They don't have enough counselors. They don't have enough social workers, and they don't have enough teachers. And you expect adding one police officer is somehow going to create a safe learning environment when it's one police officer for thousands of students, when there's still not enough support staff, when that one police officer will further the police, the school to prison pipeline. Like that's just what's going to happen. That's just what's going to happen. And that's just what has happened. And our teachers, and particularly our white parents, are still much more likely to want to call police to enforce behavior issues, particularly on Black and brown students, than white students. And to see these Black students as much more of a physical threat than they actually are. And what we know is that particularly white people, regardless of political spectrum, are much more likely to see Black kids as physical threats. We know that this actually starts at a young age where teachers and white folks are going to see a elementary school age Black girl as more of a threat than a elementary school age white girl for the exact same type of behavior. This is why we see police called on Black or brown kids in elementary school. And we have in Madison. There's stories of this all over the country. So we know these things. So the question is, why are these white parents, which are going to be more affluent than our parents of color, which have been calling for help about fights in and outside of school and resources to help these students? We have more resources inside of our juvenile detention than we do outside for kids, for our youth. Now, the county wants to invest in the Focused Interruption Coalition, which is to interrupt violence, which is great. Let's do that. But they're focused on adults. We don't have anything like this for our youth. And then again, we're not putting resources out there for our youth in the community or in schools. And then we want to talk about, well, we need to call the police on them. They're out of control. What this is going is folks basically criminalizing, particularly Black and brown kids, for a reflection of a society that is out of control. And these parents are unwilling to actually dig deep as a community. How willing are these parents to band together, to go into these schools like dads on duty without the threat of violence, without the threat of the threat of violence in the backup of police? My mind is one where they're too scared to do it, too scared of the Black body, too scared of the brown body to do this. They see these kids as criminals or potential criminals, people that are inherently violent, whether they want to admit that to themselves or not. But we see this with the idea of personal responsibility and so on and so forth, with them not even knowing the fact, like they think that these parents aren't working hard, these parents aren't trying to instill values, that there's this, that they buy into this cultural racism, which has been something since Reconstruction of this idea of inherent Black criminality and violence of Black people and lack of proper culture within Black people, which this is a deeply racist idea. When the fact is, we know Black parents are more likely to uphold education than any other racial or ethnic group in this country. That Black fathers are more involved in their kids' lives than any other racial group in this country. The values are there. What's not there is the resources and institutional support. That's what's not there. That is what's missing. And even, again, we can get into the values all you want, because I can point to a lack of values among white society in very real ways, particularly the embracing of violence as a solution to the problems, hence them turning to police to try and make schools safe, using the threat of violence to make things safe. So you want to... Anyways. Now, what this dads on duty is, when we talk about defund and community-centered approaches to public safety, this is what that is. This is a community-centered approach to public safety. Now, let's fund things like this. And again, these white parents, you know what? Fundraise with each other. Y'all have a lot of resources. Pull together some money. Or maybe be willing to up your property taxes so that MMSD can afford to fund a program like this and pay parents that are doing something like this. Let's create stipends for these parents. Or better yet, go to the schools yourselves. Organize yourselves. And do this. Get up off your butts and do this. Instead of turning to the threat of violence, which is what police are, again. The threat of violence. Y'all can't imagine engaging with black and brown students any other way except with the threat of violence right there, can you? Now, you can lie to me or to yourself about it. But when you perpetually turn to the threat of violence to address issues like this, instead of community-centered ways, instead of compassionate, human-centric ways, you tell us all we need to know. Tell us all we need to know. And now, on to police will keep lying again. This happened again in Madison and Delaware County, Pennsylvania. So in Madison, we know that a few weeks ago, a black man was being chased on State Street by Madison police officers, and one officer was shot. MPD insinuated that this black male shot an MPD officer, when it actually was an MPD officer that shot an MPD officer as they were firing into a crowd, and they could have hit people. Now, first, a bit of shameless self-promotion here. If MPD voluntarily implemented all 175, because two of the recommendations, some of them aren't exactly an MPD, but all the ones of the police ad hoc committee, which I was a part of, hundreds of recommendations, one of them would have actually prevented an officer from being shot, and potentially civilians being shot, because they wouldn't have been allowed within policy to fire into a crowded area. Seems smart, doesn't it? And now let me tell you exactly why they shouldn't be allowed to do this. MPD lied, and also journalists don't take police officers' words as the truth. So far, it's like the official statement, but police just lie so much. They don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Delaware County is another example of this. This summer, the police claimed that there's a drive-by that killed an 8-year-old girl, Fanta Bility. Again, this was a lie. Through the investigation from CNN, the incident took place outside Academy Park High School in Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb outside Philadelphia. There was reportedly a verbal altercation between a group of young men that resulted in some gunfire. There are officers standing across from the stadium when they heard this. And where they saw, there's basically a group of people that was all around, is a whole mix of people, and there's just a smaller group that were arguing amongst this larger group. And people are trying to leave as because you hear gunfire, people leave, they disperse. So again, there's chaos. And there's a car leaving as everybody is trying to leave, and the police fire into this car that was leaving directly in front of them, killing Fanta Billy. Additionally, her 12-year-old sister and a 13-year-old boy and 20-year-old woman who were in a passenger in the car were also wounded. And then the police lied and said this was a drive-by when they shot at this car. And then the press, the journalists reported this, took the word as gospel, as truth, and there you go. The ballistics show wasn't the case. But this is what happens when you let police have the ability to fire into crowds when they don't know what's going on. Again, police are inherently violent. But that, let's wrap that up here. I could keep going, but we're going to wrap that up here for this week at Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. Thanks for coming and, defund the police and all that jazz. Because seriously, community-centered approaches, resources into communities, investing in humanity. It's the way to go. Anyways, thanks for coming. Thank you, Nate, for heading up the audio and everything like that. And thanks for listening. Hit subscribe, tune in, share, and all that jazz. This is Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Have yourselves a good week.
This is 365 Media.